The Martinsyde F.1. The Martinsyde F.1 had a strangely protracted history, in which perhaps the most remarkable feature is the fact that it was completed and flown. It was ordered late in 1915 as a high-performance aircraft capable of giving a gunner an effective field of fire. It may well have been intended to be a counter-weapon to the Fokker monoplane. At that time, the excellent 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce engine, later named Eagle, was the ultimate in reliable high-powered engines. Britain still lacked an interrupter mechanism to enable a machine gun to fire through a revolving tractor air screw, and the Martinsyde design team were well aware of the superiority in performance of a good tractor design. The F-1 was therefore conceived as a tractor biplane, in which the gunner occupied the forward cockpit and stood up to fire a machine gun carried on a circular mounting built into the upper center section. A surviving drawing, dated as late as the 21st of August, 1916, depicts an early conception of the F-1 as a curious, tadpole-like aircraft in which the top line of the engine cowling sloped sharply upwards from the nose, and broad faired supports for the upper center section made the upper mainplane appear to be virtually sitting on top of the fuselage. Behind the rear center section struts, the top decking sloped downwards quite sharply again, to the pilot's cockpit. The rear fuselage was as slender as that of the G100, but the tail surfaces were of greater area than those of the single-seater. And possibly because someone realized in time that the pilot would have virtually no forward view, the F-1 was completely redesigned. Why this was done at a time when an effective interrupter mechanism had become available remains a mystery. An official document dated 9th May 1917 noted complacently that the aircraft would probably be out of date when delivered, but might be useful for experimental work at Orfordness, which was the RFC's Armament Experimental Unit. The F-1 was built and numbered A3933. In general appearance, it looked like an enlarged Martinsyde elephant, and in construction it was generally similar to the earlier type. The power unit was a 250 horsepower Rolls-Royce Mark III, the engine that was later named Eagle III. It had a frontal radiator, and was housed in a deep, bulky cowling. The fuselage was mounted between the wings in mid-gap, possibly to make it easier for the observer to get his head and shoulders to the best level for using his gun. The pilot sat several feet further aft, well behind the wings. In spite of the F-1's large size, it was reported to have good flying qualities, stability and controllability when it was officially tested in July 1917. Its crew arrangement was criticized adversely, and the magneto, carburetors, and fuel tanks were said to be very inaccessible. From Martlesham Heath, it went to Orfordness on 22nd July 1917, and at a later date it was sent to Farnborough. Obviously, the F-1 was not acceptable for operational use. No attempt was made to develop or modify it. But A3933 was not immediately scrapped. It was at Farnborough in July 1918, and was still flying there after the armistice. By that time it had been equipped for night flying. The Martinsyde F.2. While the Martinsyde F-1 was being built, a second two-seat fighter, the F-2, was designed and constructed. The F-2 was of much later conception than the F-1, to which it bore much the same resemblance as the Martinsyde RG did to the Elephant. In fact, the F-2 had the same overall dimensions as the RG, but its wings were of greater chord. In the F-2, the pilot and observer were accommodated in the classic manner back-to-back, with the pilot in the forward cockpit. A single fixed Vickers gun, mounted to port of center, was provided for the pilot. The observer had a Lewis gun on a Scarf No. 2 ring mounting. Unfortunately, as on the original Martinsyde RG, the pilot of the F-2 sat under the center section, where he had the worst possible field of view. The F-2 was a handsome single-bay biplane, powered by a 200-horsepower Hispano-Suiza engine. Its airframe was a conventional wire-braced wooden structure. The forward sides and top decking of the fuselage were plywood-covered. All other areas were covered with fabric. The F-2 was the first Martinsyde aircraft to have the characteristic shape of fin and rudder that appeared on all subsequent Martinsyde designs. The installation of the Hispano-Suiza bore a resemblance to that of the Falcon in the original Martinsyde RG. A large rectangular frontal radiator was fitted, framed in a cambered cowling. There were no radiator shutters. Ailerons were fitted to upper and lower mainplanes. The incidence of the tailplane could be varied in flight, and there was an emergency dual control in the observer's cockpit. The F-2 was tested at Martlesham Heath 2 months earlier than the F-1. It proved to have pleasant handling qualities, considerable natural stability, a short takeoff run, and a remarkably low landing speed. The official report criticisms were these: the release pressure valve is out of reach, and the front petrol tank cramps the pilot's leg movements. The pilot's view is very bad, especially for landing. The observer's rudder bar is weakly supported and liable to be broken by standing on. There are no wing skids, and the bottom aileron levers are exposed to ground breakage. The Vickers gun fitting is very weak. Although the F-2's shortcomings ruled out any possibility of production, the aircraft was used as a flying test bed for the then-new Sunbeam Arab engine. The Arab had been ordered in large numbers before it had been tested, and several early difficulties had to be overcome before it succeeded in making a satisfactory 100-hour run on the bench in mid-May 1917. Engine number 9008 was installed in the Martinsyde F-2, the necessary work being undertaken by the Sunbeam Company at its Wolverhampton factory, where the F-2 had been sent. It is known that the aircraft made its second flight with the Arab engine on the 18th of July 1917. It was damaged on landing, but it was repaired at the Sunbeam Works. The Arab-powered F-2 was returned to Martlesham Heath on 11th August and began a new series of trials as soon as it had been re-erected. Overheating proved to be a problem. On a test climb to 15,000 feet on the 23rd of August, Captain Gerald Gathergood noted that the engine was boiling all the way up, but keeping revs. He also recorded that the time to climb to that height was 34 minutes and 20 seconds. By the 1st of September, the F-2's engine was being overhauled by Sunbeam mechanics, and a new water system was being installed. But when flown by Gathergood on the following day, the engine again boiled when 4,000 feet had been reached, even though the top half of the engine cowling was not fitted. By the 12th of September, an additional water tank had been fitted, and Gathergood was able to climb to 7,000 feet, with the engine maintaining a reasonable temperature. On the 1st of October, the F-2 was flown back to Sunbeam's Wolverhampton Works for its engine to be removed and installed in an SE-5A. Thereafter, the Martinsyde F-2 fades from the records. The Arab engine, although manufactured in quantity, was never a success.